I almost didn't find it. I had already set the cup down. I was reaching for my phone when something caught my eye. A small shape at the very bottom of the mug, sitting in the last swallow of tea I hadn't finished. I tilted it toward the light. A small white pill, soft at the edges from the heat, but unmistakably a pill. My mother-in-law, Patricia, was 12 feet away in my living room, flipping through a magazine. She had made that tea herself, same as every visit. Standing at my stove while I was out of the room, pressing the warm mug into my hands when I came back. Drink it while it's hot, sweetheart. It's good for you. 3.5 years of doctors telling me there was no clinical reason I couldn't get pregnant. 3.5 years of tests, specialists, and negative results I hid at the bottom of the trash so James wouldn't feel responsible. 3.5 years of wondering what was wrong with me, and a pill at the bottom of a cup she made. I set the mug down. I arranged my face. I walked into the living room and told her the cookies were almost ready, because I had just understood something, and I needed her to think I understood nothing at all. My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 27 years old, and what I'm about to tell you, every word of it is true. Before I go on, if this story is finding you right now, please hit that like button and leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. This channel is my heart, and every one of you keeps it going. Thank you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I met James at 23 at a farmer's market, which sounds like the beginning of a romantic comedy, and honestly felt like one at the time. He was attempting to carry 4 canvas bags of apples and failing in a way that was both impressive and slightly concerning. I helped him. He laughed. A real laugh. Surprised out of him, not performed. We talked for 2 hours standing next to a honey stand while the vendor gave us increasingly pointed looks. We got married when I was 25. His aunt's backyard in Connecticut, string lights in the oak trees, 60 people who genuinely liked each other, and a caterer who made a roast tenderloin so good I still think about it sometimes when I need to believe the world is fundamentally okay. James cried a little when he saw me walk toward him. He would prefer I not mention that. I'm mentioning it anyway. James is a structural engineer, precise, methodical, allergic to guesswork. He's the kind of person who reads instruction manuals voluntarily and finds hardware stores genuinely calming, which I have made peace with as one of his more endearing qualities. He is also funny in the quiet, unexpected way that people are when they're actually paying attention. A deadpan observation delivered at exactly the right moment that makes you snort laugh and then feel slightly embarrassed about it. He remembered my coffee order after our first date and never needed reminding again. After years of people who forgot my name between texts, James felt like finally being taken seriously. His mother, Patricia, had raised him alone since he was 16. His father died of a sudden heart attack. No warning, no goodbye, just a Tuesday afternoon that split James's life into before and after. That kind of shared survival creates a particular bond, and from the very beginning, I respected it completely. I never competed with it. Patricia had held her son together through one of the worst things that can happen to a family, and I thought that made her someone worth knowing. She was warm. She called every Sunday evening without fail. She remembered birthdays, not just mine, but my mother's, my sister's, our anniversary. She showed up with food when we were tired and left before we were ready to be alone again. She had an opinion about everything and delivered it with a polish that made it feel like advice rather than interference, which is a skill I genuinely admire even now. And she made tea. That started maybe 6 months after the wedding. She had read about an herbal blend, she told me, traditional, wonderful for women's health, calming and balancing in ways that modern medicine often overlooked. She ordered the dried herbs from a small specialty shop and brought them in a cloth drawstring bag. She made it herself every visit, standing at my stove with the authority of someone who has been doing this a long time. And she brought the cup to wherever I was sitting and watched me pick it up. Slightly bitter, floral underneath. The kind of taste that announces it is doing something important to your body whether you asked it to or not. I drank it every time. Of course I did. She was being kind. It was a ritual. It was warm. And it was handed to me with what looked exactly like love. About 10 months into our marriage, James and I started talking about children. Not urgently. Softly, warmly, the way you talk about things when you're happy and the future feels wide and unhurried. 2, we thought. Maybe 3. A loud house. A Thanksgiving table with extra chairs dragged in from the garage. When we told Patricia over Sunday dinner, she set her fork down and placed both hands flat on the table, like she needed to steady herself. She said it was the most wonderful thing she'd heard in years. She said she already had names she'd been turning over in her mind. Just ideas, she added quickly. No pressure, just thoughts she'd been sitting with. She already had names. She wasn't asking what we wanted. She was describing the future she had already designed. I didn't see it. I reached across and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. She looked right at me, and she smiled. I have thought about that smile many times since. We started trying the relaxed way. No tracking, no apps, no alarms going off on anyone's phone with clinical instructions about timing, just the quiet assumption that it would happen because we were healthy and young and in love, and those things are supposed to be enough. 6 months passed. I told myself this was normal because it is normal, and because I had promised myself I wouldn't become one of those women who spirals before there's anything to spiral about. I am an organized, practical person. I made a plan. If nothing happened by a year, I would see a doctor. I stuck to the plan. A year passed. Dr. Ellison had been my OB/GYN for 3 years. Calm, precise, the kind of doctor who gives you information instead of reassurance, and somehow makes that feel like the more caring choice. She ran every standard test. Hormones, thyroid, cycle tracking, everything. She referred us to a reproductive specialist when everything came back normal. I remember thinking normal was good news. I did not yet understand that normal, in this context, was its own kind of mystery. James and I sat in the specialist's waiting room together on a Tuesday morning. They had soft lighting and a white noise machine outside the consultation room door. The white noise machine did not help. We held hands. James read nothing even though he was pretending to look at his phone. I counted the ceiling tiles. There were 43. The specialist reviewed both of our results. James's were fine. Mine were fine. Everything from every angle was fine. She folded her hands on the desk and said the sentence I would carry around for the next 2 years, like a splinter I couldn't reach. There's no clinical reason this shouldn't be happening for you. No clinical reason. Which meant we don't know. Which meant keep trying. Which meant keep hoping and try not to let hope itself become the thing that erodes you from the inside, slowly and invisibly, the way water gets into concrete. Month after month, I got good at reading tests fast, at preparing my face in advance so the result had somewhere to land that wasn't visible. I got good at the particular arithmetic of trying to stay grateful for what I had while also grieving what wasn't coming. James never made me feel blamed. He never said anything wrong, and there were so many wrong things available to say. He just stayed next to me. That was everything. And I knew even then that I was lucky. And knowing I was lucky while also being this sad was its own special kind of exhausting. Patricia was present through all of it. More frequent visits, more food, soups, casseroles, a roast she'd leave in our oven on a timer so we'd come home to a hot dinner. She brought a blueberry pie once that was genuinely one of the best things I have ever eaten. And when I asked for the recipe, she smiled and said it was a family secret she'd carry to her grave. She said it lightly, like a joke. I laughed. I think about that moment now. The pie, the joke, the smile. She said all the right things. She told me not to put pressure on myself. She said bodies have their own timing and modern medicine doesn't always have the answers. She said I was young and strong and it would happen when it was meant to. And every single visit she made the tea. Month 31, my sister called on a Saturday afternoon to tell me she was pregnant. First try. She was so happy she could barely get the words in the right order. I told her I was thrilled, and I was, genuinely, because I love my sister. And after we hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor for about 15 minutes, not crying, just sitting, the way you do when something hits you somewhere that tears can't quite reach. Patricia texted me that same evening. She had heard from my mother. "Don't compare your journey, sweetheart," she wrote. "Your time is coming, I know it." I read that text 3 times. I felt so grateful for her. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no way of knowing, was that earlier that same week, she had placed another order. Same supplier, same product, same address, same tea. She left her cardigan on the kitchen chair. She did this occasionally. Forgot small things, picked them up on the next visit without fuss. I noticed it after she'd moved to the living room and I was tidying up the kitchen. I picked it up to fold it and something fell out of the pocket and skittered across the tile floor. A small orange prescription bottle. No pharmacy label, no patient name, no printing of any kind on the outside. Just the plastic and the cap and the thin rattle of a few pills remaining inside. I picked it up. I looked at it. Older woman, medications, no big deal. I set it on the counter next to her keys so she'd see it on the way out. When Patricia came back into the kitchen a few minutes later, her eyes went to the counter and her hand moved to that bottle faster than it needed to. Not alarmingly fast, not the dramatic speed of someone caught doing something wrong, just fractionally, slightly, almost imperceptibly faster than the moment called for. She slipped it into her pocket. She picked up her keys. She kissed me on the cheek. "See you Thursday, sweetheart." I filed it nowhere. I forgot it completely within the hour. I genuinely did. But something else didn't forget. The part of the brain that runs underneath everything, tracking patterns in the background while your conscious mind goes about its business, that part kept the receipt. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't consciously clocked before. The tea ritual, specifically. I had always assumed Patricia made it herself because it was her recipe, her blend, her thing to give. But I started paying attention to the mechanics of it. She always made it while I was in another room. She never offered to show me how. She never left the herbs for me to use between visits. She brought the cup to me already made, already poured, and she stayed nearby while I drank. The way she watched me drink it, I had always read that as warmth, the attentiveness of a woman who cared. Now it sat differently. It reminded me of something I couldn't immediately name, and then I could. It was the way you watch someone take medicine. You hover, you wait, you make sure it goes down. I thought about the 3 times I had declined the tea in the past year. Once I had a headache and wanted nothing hot. Once I was running late. Once I just didn't feel like it. All 3 times she had pushed back. Pleasantly, gently, but consistently. She didn't accept the first no. She offered again. I had always said yes eventually because it felt strange to refuse twice. Because she was being kind. Because you don't say no to kindness, not when someone is offering it so genuinely, or when you think they are. Then came that Tuesday. The last swallow. The pill at the bottom of the cup. I stood at the counter in my own kitchen with it resting on my fingertip, and from the living room I could hear Patricia turning a magazine page. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car went past. The world was completely, absolutely ordinary. And I was holding the reason 3.5 years of my life had gone the way they had. I put the pill in a zip bag from the drawer. I zipped it shut. I put it in my cardigan pocket. Then I picked up the cookie plate and I walked into the living room and I sat down and I asked Patricia whether she thought the farmer's market downtown was worth the drive this time of year. She had an opinion. She always had an opinion. I listened. I nodded. I smiled. And I started making a plan. Here is the most important thing I understood in the 40 minutes after Patricia left that Tuesday. If I said one word before I had proof that couldn't be argued with, I would lose. Patricia was not a woman you could defeat with emotion. She was composed, articulate, and she had spent 6 decades being the most trustworthy person in every room she entered. If I walked into that conversation with a zip bag and a suspicion, she would be wounded, and James would be torn, and I would be the hysterical daughter-in-law who accused his mother of something monstrous based on finding a pill in a cup. The narrative would belong to her before I finished speaking. So I said nothing, and I started working. I called Robert first, a pharmacist I'd known since high school, steady and careful and someone I trusted completely. I described the pill and sent him the photo. He called back in 11 minutes. His voice had the specific, measured quality of someone choosing every word deliberately, which told me before he finished the first sentence that I had been right to be afraid. He confirmed what it was. He explained what it did. He told me that taken consistently, dissolved in a liquid, consumed daily. The effects on a woman my age would be exactly what I had been experiencing for the past 3.5 years. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the ficus plant in the corner, the one that had been slowly struggling for the past 2 years. And I thought, how long? How long had this been going on? How many cups? How many Sunday visits and Thursday afternoons and casual drop-bys with casseroles and kind words, and that warm mug pressed into my hands? I cried once, right then, for about 4 minutes. Then I stopped and I got to work. I wrote out a complete timeline on paper. Every visit I could remember, every cup of tea, every declined offer and the gentle pressure that followed. I thought about dates. We had been married 4 years and 2 months. The tea ritual had started about 6 months in, which meant she had been doing this for almost as long as I had been in her son's life. I called Diana the next morning. Family law attorney referred by a friend, and from the first 5 minutes of our meeting, I understood she was exactly the right person for this. She listened to everything without interrupting. She asked questions that told me she already understood the landscape. When I finished, she said, "What you're describing is reproductive coercion. It has a legal name, and what you have documented is more than most people bring me." She laid out the path. I took notes. I left her office, and I felt, for the first time in weeks, like I was standing on ground I had chosen. I kept accepting the tea, every visit, every cup, but I stopped drinking it. I became accomplished at the theater of drinking tea while consuming almost none of it. Mug close to my face, cooling in my hands, small sips of nothing while Patricia's attention drifted. When she looked away, I redirected small amounts into the soil of the ficus by the window. That ficus, which had been declining for 2 years in a way that no amount of watering seemed to fix, began over the following 3 weeks to look genuinely, unmistakably better. New growth. Color returning to the leaves. I found this either darkly funny or deeply upsetting depending on the hour. Mostly I found it clarifying. One afternoon while James was at the hardware store, he goes often, he genuinely finds it calming. This is simply who he is and I love him for it. I went to Patricia's handbag on the kitchen counter while she was in the living room and I found the bottle. I photographed it from every angle, every remaining pill, every detail of the container. I put it back exactly as it had been, and I went back to the kitchen and I put the kettle on. Through contacts Diana provided, I engaged an investigator. Within 2 weeks, they had confirmed that this specific formulation had been ordered online and shipped to Patricia's address. Not once, multiple times. Beginning approximately 4 years ago. 4 years. We had been married 4 years and 2 months. She had placed the first order 8 weeks after our wedding. 8 weeks. We'd still been writing thank you notes. I had still been learning where she kept things when she cooked in my kitchen, trying to be thoughtful about sharing the space. And she had already decided, already ordered, already begun. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Diana and told her we were ready to move. I told James on a Thursday evening. I had thought carefully about when and how, not because I was managing him, but because I loved him, and what I was about to say was going to break something in him that I did not know how to predict or prepare for. I made his favorite dinner first, roast chicken, the 3-hour kind. I wanted him to have eaten something real before the world shifted. When the kitchen was clean and we were sitting at the table with tea, my own tea from my own box, made by my own hands, I said, "I need to show you something, and I have a folder." James looked at the folder the way a structural engineer looks at a building he suspects has a problem in the foundation. With complete focused attention and a very still face, I laid it out piece by piece, the pill from the cup, Robert's written statement which he had formalized at my request, Diana's preliminary documentation, the investigator's confirmation, the shipping records, the dates, the address, 4 years of orders beginning 8 weeks after our wedding. I watched his face. Confusion first, genuine confusion, the kind that has nothing to perform because the mind genuinely cannot place what it's receiving. Then a stillness that I recognized as James processing something too large to process quickly. He picked up the shipping record and read it twice. He put it down and picked up Robert's statement and read it very slowly. Then he was quiet. James goes quiet in proportion to the severity of the thing. This was the quietest I had ever seen him. When he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. He asked how long. "At minimum 3 years," I said. "The records suggest 4. He stood up and walked to the kitchen window. He stood there with his back to me for a long time, 4 minutes, maybe 5, and I let him have every single one of them. I did not try to fill the silence. Whatever was happening inside him during those minutes was real and enormous, and it was his to move through at his own pace. Outside the window, it was full dark, and his reflection looked back at us both from the glass. When he turned around, his face had settled into something I had never seen on it before and hoped never to see again. It wasn't anger, though anger was part of it. It was grief. The specific, heavy grief of realizing that someone you have loved your entire life, someone who has been the fixed and trusted center of your world, has been living as a partially different person than the one you knew. He said he needed to hear it from her, directly, in person. I understood. Of course I understood. We called Patricia the next morning and asked her to come over. We gave her no indication of why, just that we'd love to see her. Could she come at 11? She said, of course. She said she'd bring something nice. She arrived with a tin of shortbread and her reading glasses on top of her head and her usual calm warmth, and she had already set her bag on the counter and started asking whether I'd like her to make some tea. She had brought the herbs. She always brought the herbs. When James said from the kitchen doorway in the quietest possible voice, "Mom, come sit down." Something moved across her face, just briefly, there and gone. She sat at the kitchen table. I sat across from her. James sat between us, which felt right, because that is where he had always been, between the two women he loved, not choosing, just present. He opened the folder. He set the photographs and the documents in front of her, one by one, without speaking. Patricia looked at them for a long time. The kitchen was utterly silent. Outside, down the street, someone was mowing their lawn. The sound of it was completely absurd in the context of what was happening at our table. I had spent weeks imagining this moment. I had imagined denial, outrage, tears, the performance of wounded innocence. I had prepared for that. I had the documentation to stand on. What I had not prepared for was what she actually did. She looked at the evidence for a long, long moment, and then she looked up. And she looked at me first. Not at James. At me. And in that look was something I had never received from her in 4 years of Sunday dinners and warm mugs and kind words. She saw me, not as a variable, and not as a daughter-in-law to be assessed and managed. She saw me as a person who had been hurt. I could see her see it. It lasted only a second, and then she looked at her son, and she said she'd been protecting him, not a denial, not I don't know what those are, not there must be some mistake. She looked at the evidence of 4 years of deliberate, sustained deception, and she explained herself. She said James had always been fragile underneath. She said she hadn't been certain about me yet. She said she had only meant for it to be temporary, that she was going to stop once she was sure, that she had been planning to stop. She said it in the measured, reasonable tone of a woman who had told herself this story so many times it had become true inside her own mind. She said it as though 3.5 years of my heartbreak were an acceptable line item in her budget of protecting her son, as though my body was something she had the right to make decisions about, as though love, her specific love, for her specific child, entitled her to that. I watched James while she spoke. I watched his face. I watched him listen to his mother explain herself in that calm, careful voice, and I watched something in him go very quiet and very final. He is not a man who makes decisions fast, but when he makes them, they hold. He stood up slowly. He looked at his mother. This woman who had held him together when he was 16 years old and his father didn't come home. This woman who had been the fixed star of his entire life. And he looked at her for a long, still moment. 5 words. Quietly. No drama. No anger in the voice, just a door closing. You need to leave now. She tried to speak. He said it again. Same words, same quiet. She gathered her coat, her bag, the tin of shortbread that no one had opened. She walked to the front door. She opened it. She stepped through. James closed it behind her. He came back to the kitchen and sat down next to me and took my hand in both of his and held it. We didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing that needed to be said yet. The shortbread sat on the counter for 6 days. We eventually ate it. It was honestly excellent shortbread. Patricia was always a remarkable baker. I choose to find that funny. Life is too short not to. The weeks after that had their own texture, a quietness that wasn't emptiness, more like the particular stillness of a house after a long storm, things settling, air clearing, the sense of walking through rooms and reclaiming them one by one. James grieved. I want to tell you that clearly and without softening it, because I think it matters. He stood completely by me. And he also mourned his mother, and both of those things were true at the same time, and I loved him more for not pretending they weren't. He didn't talk about it constantly. He would go quiet sometimes in the evenings, sitting with something he was working through, and I would sit near him and not push. That was all I could do, and it was enough. Diana sent a formal letter to Patricia. It named what she had done by its legal name, reproductive coercion. It outlined in precise and documented language what we had, what the law recognized, and what we expected. Patricia retained her own attorney. Weeks of correspondence followed, which I left almost entirely to Diana, because I had made a decision. I was done letting this situation occupy the center of my life. It had lived there long enough. I had other things to grow. 4 months after that Thursday evening in October on a Tuesday morning in February. Tuesdays keep showing up in this story, I've noticed. I took a pregnancy test. I stood in the bathroom and looked at it. Took another one. One more after that because 2 data points felt insufficient, and apparently I have become a person who requires 3, which James found completely characteristic of me when I told him later, and honestly, he's not wrong. All 3 said the same thing. I sat down on the bathroom floor, that same floor where I had sat after Robert's call, where I had sat so many times before with the specific weight of another negative result, and I cried for a long time. Not sad crying, the other kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere deeper than sadness, that moves through you and takes something with it when it goes, leaves you lighter. The kind that is relief and joy and grief all arriving at the same moment because they've been traveling together for 3.5 years, and they all got there at once. James was in the hallway when I opened the bathroom door. He looked at my face. He looked at what I was holding. He didn't say a word. He just stepped forward and held me right there in the doorway, and I thought, we made it. Against everything, we made it through. Our daughter arrived in November. 8 pounds, 11 ounces, which the midwife announced with genuine respect, like Claire had come in with a resume. The delivery nurse said she had never seen a newborn look so immediately certain of her opinions. I told her she'd had extra time to form them. She had, after all, been waiting longer than planned. We named her Claire. She has James's eyes and my stubbornness and an extremely firm position on what she will and will not tolerate at any given moment, which she communicates without hesitation. She is 11 months old, and she is the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen. The legal matter resolved quietly, a settlement that included, among several other terms, a formal written acknowledgement from Patricia of what she had done. The language was careful and lawyered on both sides, but the substance was clear, signed, notarized, filed, real, permanent. That was what I needed most from it, for the truth to exist somewhere that couldn't be erased or rewritten or gradually softened into something more comfortable for everyone involved. Patricia lost the one thing she had been trying so hard to protect, her place at the center of her son's life. The key to our house is gone. The Sunday dinners are gone. The woman James speaks to now, occasionally and briefly and at a careful distance, is not the woman who had a standing invitation to my kitchen and arms full of casseroles and a cloth bag of herbs she made into tea. That woman is gone. And the karmically perfect part of all of it, the part that, if this were a movie, would feel too neat but is simply true, is that Patricia lost her son's closeness precisely because she tried too hard to keep it. Every pill was an attempt to hold on. Every cup of tea was an act of control dressed up as care. And the only thing that actually cost her everything was the doing of it. She was afraid of losing James, and she lost him. I don't carry hatred for her. I've tried that on, and it's too heavy, and I have a baby to lift. But I do carry the truth of what happened, and I always will. I am in my kitchen on a Wednesday morning. Claire is asleep upstairs. The ficus is thriving. 4 new leaves since spring. It turns out all it needed was to stop receiving what Patricia was putting into it. James left his coffee mug on the counter again. I've mentioned this 17 times. I have decided 18 won't be the one that changes anything. Some battles you pick, some you step around. Claire is 11 months old. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and she will not accept tea from anyone. She has strong opinions about what goes in her cup. I find this completely correct. Here is what I want to say to you. The thing I couldn't have told you 3.5 years ago because I didn't know it yet. The most dangerous kindness is the kind that needs something from you in return, even if the person offering it doesn't fully understand that's what's happening. Patricia did not think of herself as someone causing harm. In her mind, she was protecting her child, holding a variable steady, buying time, making sure the story went the way she had decided it should go before either James or I had any say in the matter. She had loved James through the worst thing that ever happened to him. She had held him together when he was 16 and falling apart, and somewhere in the years that followed, that love had curdled into something that looked identical to love on the outside, but had control at its center. That's the thing about control. It wears love's face so convincingly. It speaks in love's voice. It brings food and calls on Sundays and remembers birthdays and makes tea. It is almost impossible to see until you are holding the evidence of it in your hand. She had a key to my house. She had a standing place at my table. She had 4 years of small, warm gestures that I received and was grateful for, that I told myself were proof that we were family. And underneath all of it, she was making a decision about my body and my future and my marriage that she had no right to make. It didn't hold. It never holds. These things never hold, because truth has a way of surfacing, not always quickly, not always neatly, but it finds the light eventually, it always does. It found it at the bottom of a teacup on an ordinary Tuesday morning in April, and once it was in the light, everything changed. James chose me when it cost him something real, and he chose me anyway. He keeps choosing me. And Claire is upstairs. Never let anyone make your tea.